But we must never forget, this is not a war of choice. This is a war of necessity. Those who attacked America on 9/11 are plotting to do so again. If left unchecked, the Taliban insurgency will mean an even larger safe haven from which al-Qaeda would plot to kill more Americans. So this is not only a war worth fighting, this is fundamental to the defense of our people.
Well, our next guest says the president's safe haven argument for expanding the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan should be viewed with skepticism. Stephen Walt, professor of international affairs at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, author of Taming American Power and the Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. His article for Foreign Policy is called The Safe Haven Myth. He joins us now from Boston. Professor Walt, welcome to Democracy Now! Why myth?
It's a myth, or at least a set of claims that should be taken with some skepticism, because it rests on a set of worst-case assumptions, which, if you link them all together, makes it appear that unless we are completely successful in defeating the Taliban in Afghanistan, we're going to end up with another 9/11. It's very effective rhetoric, because if you use the phrase al-Qaeda, which immediately alarms people, and then you talk about something worrisome like a safe haven for al-Qaeda, people put those things together and don't ask just how serious the problem is, just how much a less than complete rout of the Taliban in Afghanistan would be for American national security. So again, it's an effective argument for the president to make, but you have to unpack the various claims that are embedded in it and examine each one to see if there really is a serious national security threat, and most importantly, whether or not the national security threat that's being presented there is worth an open-ended commitment of American forces and American money. My judgment was that if you look at this carefully, it probably doesn't.
What do you think? What do you see as a solution here to the occupation of Afghanistan?
Well, I think ultimately the United States is going to have to realize that Afghanistan's fate is going to have to be determined by the Afghan people. At present, we have a large military presence there. It's not large enough to control the entire country, but it's large enough to be a disruptive element in various parts of the country. And we are attempting to create a sort of Western-style centralized state with a functioning democracy in a country where that has not been the traditional form of government, where a weak central government has been the practice, where it's a relatively mountainous country, and where there are very deep social divisions within different groups there. We're attempting to essentially do large-scale social engineering in a country of some 32 million people that we don't understand particularly well. And I think that's ultimately a goal that we're going to fail at, despite our best intentions. Again, if that is justified by the national security argument that we have to prevent al-Qaeda from gaining a safe haven there, it seems to me that the danger we are averting by throwing more and more resources at Afghanistan probably isn't worth it. Now, it seems to me that the more you increase the Western and American presence in places like Afghanistan and conceivably also Pakistan, and the more we are engaged in trying to sort of restructure their societies along lines that we think are appropriate, the more we play into the narrative that they use to try and attract support and recruit people in Afghanistan itself. But one of our challenges is to find ways to advance our interests and advance some of our objectives without actually making the job harder for ourselves. It seems to me that the larger the American footprint is in that part of the world, in fact, the more difficult we are likely to make our task. And I think the record of the last several years suggests that. I do also want to go back to a point we should emphasize. One of the assumptions that the safe haven argument makes is that the Taliban is and al-Qaeda are essentially the same organization, that they are ideological soulmates. And so if the Taliban were to regain power in Afghanistan, they would immediately invite bin Laden back, give him some room to operate in, give him as much support as they could afford, and therefore make him much more formidable as a danger. I think if you look carefully at that, it's a pretty skeptical or a pretty questionable argument. I mean, first of all, the Taliban itself is a very heterogeneous umbrella label. There are lots of different factions within it. They don't agree on everything. They're motivated by different things. And a great many members of the Taliban don't share al-Qaeda's jihadist philosophy. They're not trying to restore a caliphate in the Arab world. They're not trying to bring down the West in any fundamental way. So it seems to me you can't assume that even in the event that they won in Afghanistan, which is by no means a sure thing, but even if they did, it's not obvious to me that they would be giving a lot of help to bin Laden. Among other things, they would have to ask themselves, do you want to help bin Laden attack the West or attack the United States again, and therefore give the United States a reason to come back here and do what we did in 2002, oust them from power once again? I think they'd have to rethink that one pretty carefully.